When a white woman dials 911 about a black family's barbecue at Oakland's Lake Merritt, she never expects what happens next. The responding officer's unusual approach doesn't just change one afternoon. It sparks a movement that will transform an entire city. Oakland's Lake Merritt sparkled under the warm May sunshine, its waters reflecting a perfect California sky. The Jackson family had been hosting their monthly community barbecue in this same spot for 15 years, turning a simple family tradition into something of a neighborhood institution. Dr. James Jackson, a respected pediatrician at Highland Hospital, manned the grill while his wife Teresa, a high school principal, organized the potluck contributions that seemed to multiply every month. Their children, Marcus, 17, and Lily, 14, had grown up with these gatherings, learning the sacred art of their father's brisket recipe alongside lessons about community and connection. What had started as a simple family meal had evolved into an unofficial community event, drawing people from all walks of Oakland life to share food, stories, and fellowship. This particular Sunday seemed especially blessed. The Jacksons had just received news that Marcus had been accepted to Stanford's pre-med program with a full scholarship. The celebration drew even more people than usual. Hospital colleagues, teachers, neighbors, and countless families whose children had been treated by Dr. Jackson over the years. "Looking good, Doc," called out Officer Michael Chen as he strolled by on his beat. The Asian American police officer had been patrolling this area for a decade, and the Jackson family barbecues were one of his favorite parts of the job. He often timed his lunch break to coincide with them, knowing Teresa would insist on fixing him a plate. "Mike, perfect timing." Teresa waved him over. "We're celebrating Marcus's Stanford acceptance." "No way. Stanford?" Officer Chen grinned, pulling Marcus into a quick hug. "Man, I remember when you were just a kid playing soccer around here." "Pre-med?" Following in Dad's footsteps, Marcus beamed, adjusting his Stanford cap proudly. The gathering had attracted its usual diverse crowd. Black families who'd been in the neighborhood for generations, Hispanic residents from the nearby apartments, young white tech workers who'd recently moved to the area, and Asian families who ran many of the local businesses. Children played together on the grass, while adults shared dishes that represented a global culinary tour. Soul food beside Vietnamese spring rolls, Mexican tamales next to Korean bulgogi. That's when Patricia Whitman noticed the smoke. She'd moved into one of the newly renovated lakeside condos 3 months ago and had already made several calls to the city about concerning activities around the lake. The sight of so many people, particularly so many black people, gathering in her park space had been raising her blood pressure all morning. "Excuse me," she called shrilly from the walking path, her designer athleisure wear suggesting she'd interrupted her morning power walk. "This is a public park. You can't just set up an entire restaurant here." Dr. Jackson looked up from the grill, where he was carefully basting his famous brisket. "Good morning. Would you like to join us? There's plenty to go around." Patricia's face pinched tighter. "I most certainly would not. This is completely inappropriate. There are regulations about food preparation in public spaces." Teresa stepped forward, her principal's diplomatic skills kicking in. "We have all the proper permits, ma'am. We've been hosting these gatherings for 15 years. Well, I've lived here for 3 months, and I've never seen anything like this." Patricia pulled out her phone. "The smoke is affecting air quality. There are dozens of people blocking the walking path, and who knows if any of this food is even safe to eat. I'm calling the police." A tense murmur rippled through the gathering. Marcus instinctively moved closer to his younger sister, while several of the children stopped playing to watch nervously. "Ma'am," Teresa tried again. "Officer Chen is actually right here if you have concerns." A real police officer, Patricia was already dialing, not someone who's obviously friends with all this. She gestured dismissively at the diverse gathering. Officer Chen stepped forward, his badge clearly visible. "Ma'am, I am a real police officer, and I can assure you—" "Hello, police?" Patricia spoke loudly into her phone. "There's a large group of people having an unauthorized gathering at Lake Merritt. They've got fires going. They're blocking public access, and they're creating a disturbance. I don't feel safe. Please hurry." Dr. Jackson exchanged a look with Officer Chen. Years of dealing with similar situations reflected in their resigned expressions. Several of the white tech workers had moved protectively closer to their black neighbors, forming a subtle but clear barrier between Patricia and the gathering. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up to the lake path. Patricia straightened triumphantly as Officers Sarah Rodriguez and James Sullivan stepped out. "Finally," she exclaimed. "Officers, this group is having their monthly community barbecue." Officer Rodriguez finished, breaking into a warm smile. Dr. Jackson, that brisket smells amazing. Please tell me you saved some for us. Patricia's mouth fell open as Officer Sullivan waved to several children who were calling his name. You know these people. Know them. Officer Sullivan accepted a plate from Teresa. Dr. Jackson saved my nephew's life last year in the ER, and Mrs. Jackson helped my daughter get into college. This barbecue is the best thing that happens in this neighborhood. What happened next would be talked about in the community for months to come. Patricia Whitman's face flushed an alarming shade of red. This is completely unprofessional. You're supposed to be enforcing the law, not joining some illegal gathering. Officer Rodriguez's smile remained steady, but her eyes hardened slightly. Ma'am, let me explain exactly what I'm observing here. I see a properly permitted community gathering that's been a neighborhood tradition for 15 years. I see a respected doctor and community leader sharing food with his neighbors. I see children playing safely while adults build community bonds. Most importantly, she gestured to her body camera. I see someone making a false police report based on what appears to be racial bias. Racial bias, Patricia sputtered. How dare you? I'm simply concerned about public safety. And then you'll be pleased to know that since these gatherings began 15 years ago, crime rates in this area have dropped by 40%, Officer Sullivan added, checking something on his phone. In fact, I'm pulling up the community impact report we did last year. The Jackson family barbecues were specifically cited as an example of successful community policing through neighborhood engagement. Marcus, who had been filming the interaction on his phone, caught Patricia's expression shifting from righteous indignation to dawning uncertainty. But the smoke, she tried weakly, is from a permitted, regulation height grill being operated by someone who's passed the county food safety certification, Officer Chin supplied. Dr. Jackson actually teaches food safety classes at the community center. Teresa, ever the educator, saw an opportunity. Patricia, may I call you Patricia? Why don't you take a moment to actually look at what's happening here? The gathered community had continued their celebration, though many were watching the confrontation unfold. A group of children, black, white, Asian, and Hispanic, were playing an impromptu game of soccer. Young tech workers were engaged in animated conversations with elderly neighborhood residents. A Muslim family was sharing their homemade baklava while learning how to make tamales from their Hispanic neighbors. This isn't just a barbecue, Teresa continued gently. This is what a healthy community looks like. It's people from different backgrounds coming together, sharing food, watching each other's children, building the kinds of bonds that make neighborhoods safer and stronger. Officer Rodriguez nodded. You mentioned not feeling safe, but look around. Do you see the real estate agent who sold you your condo? She's right there, playing with those kids. Your building's maintenance supervisor, he's over there, learning Dr. Jackson's brisket recipe. The barista who makes your morning coffee, she brought those pies. Patricia's righteous anger seemed to deflate slightly as she recognized familiar faces in the crowd. I didn't realize. No, Dr. Jackson said kindly, approaching with a plate. You didn't, but that's okay. Realizing is the first step. This is my grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe. Would you like to try it? The moment hung in the balance. The gathered community, the officers, even the children seemed to hold their breath. Patricia looked at the offered plate, then at her phone still clutched in her hand, then at the faces around her, faces that showed not anger or judgment, but patient invitation. Lily Jackson, all of 14 years old but wise beyond her years, stepped forward. I can show you where the best spots to sit are. The one under the oak tree gets nice shade, and you can see the whole lake. Something in the young girl's genuine kindness seemed to crack Patricia's defensive shell. Yes, thank you. That would be nice. As Lily led Patricia toward the shade, Officer Rodriguez turned off her body camera with a slight smile. You know, she said quietly to Teresa, we could press charges for the false report. Teresa watched as Lily introduced Patricia to some of the other neighbors, saw the awkward but genuine attempts at conversation beginning. I think this might work out better. Dr. Jackson nodded, turning back to his grill. Sometimes people just need a taste of community to remember their humanity. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot, because what happened next would transform not just Patricia's perspective, but the entire neighborhood's understanding of community, justice, and the power of breaking bread together. Officer Chen's radio crackled with another call about a suspicious gathering, this time from a different part of the lake. The response to that call would set in motion a chain of events that would reshape Oakland's approach to community policing and neighborhood relations. Officer Chen's radio crackled again. Responding to reports of unauthorized gathering at the northeastern shore, caller claims aggressive individuals are occupying public space. He exchanged knowing looks with Officers Rodriguez and Sullivan. The northeastern shore was where a group of young Black and Hispanic men regularly played basketball on Sunday afternoons, another long-standing community tradition. "I'll handle it," Officer Chen said. But Marcus Jackson stepped forward. "Let me come with you," the teenager suggested. "I've been documenting these community interactions for my senior project on urban sociology. Plus, those are my friends you're heading to check on." Patricia Whitman, who had been cautiously sampling Teresa's jerk chicken while talking with neighbors, overheard the exchange. Something shifted in her expression. "I'd like to come too," she said suddenly, surprising everyone. I think I need to see this." Officer Chen considered for a moment, then nodded. "A learning opportunity," he said quietly to Teresa, who gave her permission for Marcus to go. As they walked toward the basketball courts, Patricia spoke hesitantly. "I never knew everyone's stories before. The man who taught me about the sweet potato pie, he said he was a surgeon." "Dr. Thompson," Marcus supplied. "He's one of the top neurosurgeons at Highland Hospital. The kids call him the brain wizard." "And the woman with the tamales?" "Mrs. Rivera. She owns 3 restaurants in Oakland and puts half a dozen kids through college every year with her scholarship program." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I've been calling the police about her food cart program for weeks. I had no idea." They reached the basketball courts, where a familiar scene was unfolding. A woman in designer yoga wear was gesturing animatedly at a group of young men playing basketball, her phone already out. "Karen," Patricia muttered, then caught herself with a slight flush. "I mean, Sharon. She's on my condo board." Officer Chen approached the situation, but before he could speak, Patricia stepped forward. "Sharon, stop!" Her voice carried across the court. "Don't make the same mistake I just did." Sharon turned, confused. "Patricia, what are you doing with them?" "Learning," Patricia said firmly. "Put your phone down and come with me. There's something you need to see." Marcus watched in amazement as Patricia, the same woman who had tried to shut down his family's barbecue 20 minutes ago, began explaining to Sharon about community and connection. She pointed out Dr. Thompson teaching kids about the brain using a watermelon as a model, Mrs. Rivera sharing her business expertise with aspiring entrepreneurs, and the way the police officers were part of the community rather than just policing it. "But the noise," Sharon protested weakly. "Is the sound of community," one of the basketball players interjected. "I'm Kevin, by the way, third-year law student at Berkeley. We've been playing here every Sunday for years." As if on cue, a stray basketball rolled toward Sharon. A young player, no more than 12, came running after it. "Sorry," he called out. "Hey, want to play? We're teaching the kids about physics using basketball. My dad says the arc of the shot is a parabola, whatever that means." Sharon looked startled. "Your father teaches physics?" "At Oakland Tech," the boy grinned. "He says sports are just math in motion." Marcus, still filming, captured the moment Sharon's worldview visibly shifted. She looked at the basketball, then at the player she had been about to report, then at Patricia. I think I'd like to learn about parabolas," she said quietly. What happened next would become part of Lake Merritt legend. The video Marcus shot went viral. 2 women in designer athletic wear learning to shoot baskets from a group of young Black and Hispanic men. Their awkward attempts met with patient instruction and genuine encouragement. But more importantly, phones began ringing around the lake. Sharon, in an apparent attempt at redemption, was texting every member of the condo board. Patricia was calling other recent transplants to the neighborhood. Within an hour, the monthly Jackson family barbecue had grown to include dozens of new faces. Residents who had previously only seen the community through their windows or security cameras. Officer Chen watched it all unfold with a satisfied smile. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch. Regarding that call about the northeastern shore, situation resolved through community engagement." In fact, he looked at Marcus, who was still filming. "What would you say to helping us create a new police training video about community response? I think people need to see this." Marcus grinned. "Actually, I have an idea that might be even better." The story of what Marcus proposed would not only transform Oakland's approach to community policing, but would spread to cities across the country, proving that sometimes the best response to prejudice isn't punishment, but invitation. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood before the Oakland City Council, his Stanford acceptance letter in one pocket, and his viral video playing on the chamber's large screen. The footage had gained over 2 million views, but it wasn't the viral moment he was there to discuss. What you're seeing, he explained to the rapt council members, isn't just a feel-good story about overcoming prejudice. It's a template for transforming community relations. He gestured to the crowd behind him, Officers Chen, Rodriguez, and Sullivan, his parents, Patricia and Sharon, and dozens of community members from around Lake Merritt. I call it the Breaking Bread Initiative, Marcus continued. The idea is simple. Every police precinct in Oakland would partner with local community leaders to host monthly gatherings, similar to our family barbecue. But here's the key. When someone calls the police about a suspicious gathering or unauthorized activity that appears to be racially motivated, responding officers would have the option to invite the caller to participate in community engagement rather than immediately escalating the situation. Councilmember Rodriguez, no relation to Officer Rodriguez, leaned forward. You're suggesting we respond to potential racial bias with dinner invitations? Not exactly. Dr. Jackson stood to support his son. We're suggesting creating opportunities for people to discover their shared humanity. As a doctor, I can tell you that fear and prejudice often stem from unfamiliarity. The simple act of sharing a meal, learning someone's story, seeing them in their full humanity, it can be more transformative than any punishment. Patricia stepped up to the podium, her designer athleisure replaced by more professional attire. 2 weeks ago, I was the problem. I was the one calling the police about suspicious gatherings that were nothing more than families and neighbors enjoying their community. Now, she gestured to Sharon and several other neighbors. We're part of the neighborhood watch, but not the kind that calls the police on every black or brown face we see. We watch out for our neighbors. We know their names, their stories. We're building real security through community. Officer Chen shared his perspective next. From a law enforcement standpoint, this approach could significantly reduce unnecessary police confrontations while building genuine trust between officers and the communities we serve. The program would be voluntary, both for officers and for those we interact with, but early interest from within the department has been overwhelming. The presentation continued with remarkable stories from the past 2 weeks. Sharon had discovered that one of the basketball players was a law student interested in the same field of corporate law she practiced. They were now meeting weekly for mentoring sessions. Patricia had joined the local neighborhood council and was working to change some of the very regulations she had tried to enforce against the barbecue. But it was Lily Jackson, Marcus's 14-year-old sister, who perhaps made the most compelling case. Last week, she told the council, a new family moved into the condos by the lake. They saw our gathering and looked nervous. But before anyone could call the police, Patricia went over and invited them to join us. She told them her own story, and now they're helping plan next month's barbecue. That's how change happens. One meal, one conversation, one connection at a time. The council chambers erupted in supportive applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. I have already spoken with student leaders at Stanford, he announced. They're interested in implementing similar programs in Palo Alto. And after the video went viral, we've received inquiries from community groups in Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, and New York. Councilmember Rodriguez smiled. It seems you've started a movement, young man. No, Marcus corrected respectfully. We've started a conversation. The movement begins when we all decide to embrace it. The council voted unanimously to approve a pilot program of the Breaking Bread Initiative, allocating funds for community gatherings in 3 police precincts. But what happened next would exceed everyone's expectations. Within a month, the simple idea born at Lake Merritt would begin to reshape conversations about community policing and racial bias across the country. And it all started because a family decided to respond to prejudice not with anger, but with an invitation to break bread together. The story's next chapter would unfold in unexpected ways, as the Breaking Bread Initiative faced its first real test in a situation that would challenge everyone's commitment to this new approach. 3 months into the Breaking Bread Initiative, Oakland's late summer heat shimmered over Lake Merritt. The program had been successfully implemented in 3 police precincts, with documented decreases in racially motivated police calls and improved community relations. Marcus, home from his first quarter at Stanford, was collecting data for his undergraduate research project on community-based conflict resolution. Then came the incident at Jefferson Park. It started with a children's birthday party. The Martinez family had reserved the park's picnic area for their daughter's quinceañera. The celebration was vibrant with Mexican traditions, colorful decorations, mariachi music, and dozens of family members in formal attire. The call came in at 3:47 p.m. Emergency. There's some kind of gang gathering at Jefferson Park. They're being loud. There's suspicious music, and I'm seeing possible weapons. The weapons were props for traditional dances. The gang gathering was a family celebration that had obtained all proper permits. But the caller, Edmund Brooks, CEO of a local tech startup, was insistent that police respond immediately. Officer Rodriguez was first on scene. With Officers Chen and Sullivan arriving shortly after, they found Brooks filming the celebration with his phone, narrating his suspicions in a way that was clearly meant for social media. "Sir," Officer Rodriguez approached calmly, "I understand you have concerns about this gathering." "Thank God you're here," Brooks exclaimed. "They're clearly violating multiple ordinances. There's amplified music, unauthorized food service, and just look at how many of them there are." Marcus, who had been interviewing community members nearby for his research, recognized a crucial moment. He approached with his own camera rolling, nodding to Officer Rodriguez. "Mr. Brooks," Officer Rodriguez said, "I'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Marcus Jackson, one of the founders of the Breaking Bread Initiative, and this," she gestured to the celebration, "is a legally permitted quinceañera, a traditional coming-of-age celebration in Mexican culture." "I don't care what it's called," Brooks snapped. "They're disturbing the peace. I have investors coming to my house for a poolside meeting in an hour. How am I supposed to impress them with this noise?" That's when Sofia Martinez, the quinceañera herself, stepped forward in her elegant rose-colored dress. "Excuse me, sir, would your investors perhaps enjoy authentic Mexican cuisine and cultural entertainment as part of their visit?" Brooks blinked, thrown off script. "What?" Sofia's father, Miguel Martinez, joined his daughter. "What my Sofia is suggesting, senor, is an opportunity. Instead of seeing us as a disturbance, why not let us add value to your business meeting?" Marcus watched Brooks's face as confusion warred with his predetermined narrative. Officer Rodriguez seized the moment. "Mr. Brooks, you have two options. We can process this as a formal complaint, which will require documenting that you made false accusations about weapons and gang activity, something that could be problematic for a CEO in a diverse city like Oakland. Or, Marcus stepped in, you could join us in turning this moment into something remarkable. Your investors are coming to Oakland. Show them what makes this city special." Miguel Martinez extended his hand. "My catering company serves some of the finest restaurants in the Bay Area. Let us show you true Mexican hospitality." What happened next would become another viral moment in the Breaking Bread Initiative's growing legacy. Brooks's backyard business meeting transformed into a cultural exchange that spilled over his fence into the park celebration. Tech investors in suits found themselves learning traditional Mexican dances. Sofia's relatives shared family recipes and business insights with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. Patricia and Sharon, who had become unofficial ambassadors for the initiative, arrived after seeing updates in the Neighborhood Watch group chat. They helped bridge the initial awkwardness, sharing their own stories of transformation. "I was you 3 months ago," Patricia told Brooks quietly, as they watched his investors enthusiastically participating in a group dance. "Convinced I was protecting my property values, my peace and quiet, my idea of what the neighborhood should be. I nearly missed out on the true value of community." Brooks, watching one of his key investors excitedly discuss restaurant franchising opportunities with Miguel Martinez, began to understand. But the real transformation came later that evening. As the celebration wound down, Brooks's investors had not only committed to his startup, but had also invested in Miguel's catering company. Sofia had received offers for summer internships from 3 tech firms. And most importantly, a moment that could have ended in conflict had become a catalyst for connection. Marcus, reviewing his footage with Officer Rodriguez, noticed something significant. "Look," he pointed to his screen. "Not a single police call from this neighborhood since the party started. Last month, there were 12 calls on a typical Sunday. People are learning." Officer Rodriguez smiled. "When you know your neighbors' stories, it's harder to see them as threats." But as Marcus would soon discover, not everyone was ready to embrace this new approach. The Breaking Bread Initiative was about to face its biggest challenge yet, from a source none of them had expected. The challenge emerged from an unexpected direction: the Oakland Police Officers Association, OPOA. Not every officer was enthusiastic about the Breaking Bread Initiative's approach to community policing. A vocal minority, led by veteran Sergeant James Morrison, argued that the program was compromising officer safety and undermining traditional police authority. The controversy erupted after a local news station aired a segment titled "Policing or Picnicking," which criticized officers for socializing instead of enforcing the law. Sergeant Morrison appeared on camera, expressing his concerns. While some officers are playing community hosts, serious crimes are happening elsewhere, he declared. We're law enforcement, not social workers. This Breaking Bread program is a misuse of police resources and training. Marcus was in his dorm room at Stanford when the clip went viral. His phone lit up with texts from officers Chen, Rodriguez, and Sullivan, all warning him that the OPOA was calling for a formal review of the program. But it was the message from his sister Lily that caught his attention. Remember Officer Morrison's daughter in my class? She's been skipping school since the news segment. I think she's embarrassed. Maybe that's our way in. Marcus called Officer Chen immediately. What do we know about Morrison's family situation? Single dad, Chen replied. His wife passed away 3 years ago. He's raising Emma alone. She's 14, same as your sister. Marcus thought about the countless family dinners where officers had become part of their extended community. Where does Morrison patrol? East Oakland, tough beat, high crime area. He's old school, thinks aggressive policing is the only way to maintain order. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When's the OPOA meeting to review the program? Next Friday. They're letting us present our case. But Morrison has a lot of influence. Many older officers share his views. Book the community center for Thursday night, Marcus said, and call Miguel Martinez. We're going to need his catering. What unfolded over the next week would test everything the Breaking Bread initiative stood for. Lily took the lead at school, quietly befriending Emma Morrison. Despite the tension between their families, she learned that Emma missed the community she'd had when her mother was alive. When their house was full of family dinners and neighborhood gatherings, Patricia and Sharon activated their network of converted skeptics, other residents who had initially opposed the program but now championed it. They collected data, testimonials, and economic impact reports, showing how improved community relations had actually increased property values and decreased crime rates. Dr. Jackson reached out to his contacts at Highland Hospital, gathering statistics about the reduction in confrontational police incidents and their impact on emergency room admissions. Teresa mobilized her educational network, demonstrating how the program had improved school police relationships and reduced campus incidents. But the masterstroke came from an unexpected source. Sofia Martinez, the quinceañera, whose celebration had transformed a potential conflict into a community triumph, had an idea that would change everything. On Thursday night, Sergeant Morrison arrived at the community center, expecting to find a formal presentation defending the program. Instead, he found himself walking into what appeared to be a wedding reception. The tables were elegantly set, photos lined the walls, not just of recent community gatherings, but of police officers throughout Oakland's history, including a prominent display of Morrison's own father, who had served on the force 30 years ago. There was even a faded picture of a young Officer Morrison at a community pancake breakfast, smiling broadly beside his now-late wife. Emma was there, helping Lily arrange flowers. She froze when she saw her father, but Sofia Martinez smoothly intervened. Officer Morrison, she smiled warmly. Emma was just telling us about her mother's famous empanada recipe. We'd love to add it to our community cookbook, if you're willing to share. Before Morrison could respond, Marcus stepped forward, but instead of launching into a defense of the program, he simply said, "Sir, would you walk with me? There's something you need to see." He led Morrison through the gathering, where each station told a story. At one table, Officer Rodriguez was teaching young children about police equipment, transforming what could be scary into something understood. At another, Officer Chen was mediating a discussion between former rivals, gang members turned community leaders who now work together on neighborhood safety initiatives. They passed Patricia and Sharon, who were explaining to newer residents how their transformed understanding of community had actually made them feel safer than any number of police patrols. Miguel Martinez was sharing his business success story with aspiring entrepreneurs, his catering empire proving that opportunity could flourish in unexpected places. But it was at the last table that Marcus stopped. Here, displayed on a small screen, was footage from police body cameras showing the before and after of the Breaking Bread approach. The contrast was stark. Traditional confrontational responses versus the new community-engaged resolution of conflicts. "Your daughter misses the community she had when her mother was alive," Marcus said quietly. Many of these officers remember that too. How police work used to include being part of the neighborhood, not just policing it. This program isn't about replacing law enforcement, it's about enhancing it. Morrison watched as Emma, across the room, laughed at something Lily had said. It was the first time he'd seen her really smile in weeks. "But what about officer safety?" he asked, his voice less certain than before. That's when Officer Chen stepped up. Officer Chen placed a gentle hand on Morrison's shoulder. "James, in 20 years on the force, I've never felt safer than I do now. When people see us as part of their community, rather than an occupying force, they look out for us too." Remember Martinez's quinceañera? 2 former gang members stepped in to defuse a situation before we even had to approach it. That's what real safety looks like. Morrison looked around the room again, seeing it with new eyes. His gaze lingered on Emma, who was now helping serve food alongside Lily and Sophia. The 3 girls moved with the easy familiarity of old friends, despite having only connected recently. "The day Maria died," Morrison said quietly, referring to his late wife, "this community showed up for us, brought food, helped with Emma. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. Started seeing threats instead of neighbors." Marcus nodded. "That's what breaking bread is really about. Not just food, but remembering our shared humanity." Every person who initially opposed this program had their own story, their own fears. But fear melts away when you share a meal with someone and hear their story. The next day, at the OPOA meeting, Sergeant Morrison surprised everyone by taking the podium first. "Yesterday," he began, "I went to what I thought would be a defense of this program. Instead, I found myself at a reminder of why I became a police officer in the first place. To serve and protect, yes. But you can't truly protect a community unless you're part of it." He turned to face his fellow officers. "I've been wrong about the Breaking Bread initiative. This isn't soft policing. It's smart policing. Every meal shared is a potential crisis averted. Every conversation is a bridge built. And yes, every barbecue is an opportunity to show our children a different way forward." The vote to continue and expand the program was unanimous. 1 month later, Lake Merritt hosted the largest community gathering in its history. Police officers from every precinct joined residents from all corners of Oakland. Emma Morrison and her father brought her mother's empanadas, made from the recipe now featured in the community cookbook. Patricia and Sharon led workshops on transforming neighborhood watch programs into community connection initiatives. Sophia Martinez announced a scholarship program funded by her family's now thriving catering business, aimed at helping young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. Marcus, home from Stanford for the weekend, stood with his family watching the sunset over the lake. Officer Chen joined them, proudly sharing that 6 other cities had adopted the Breaking Bread model, with more launching pilot programs every month. "You know what the best part is?" Lily said, watching Emma teach younger kids the traditional Mexican dances she'd learned from Sophia. "Now when people call the police about suspicious gatherings, they end up becoming part of them instead." Dr. Jackson smiled at his children. "Sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice isn't confrontation or even education. It's invitation. When you invite someone to share your food, your stories, your community, you invite them to expand their understanding of family." Teresa added, "And family looks out for each other, learns from each other, grows together." As the evening wound down, Marcus filmed one final scene for his research project. Sergeant Morrison and Miguel Martinez grilling together, sharing recipes and stories. Patricia and Sharon welcoming newcomers with the same warmth they'd once received. Officers Rodriguez and Sullivan playing basketball with local teens. And dozens of small moments of connection that would have seemed impossible just months before. The Breaking Bread initiative had transformed not just a neighborhood, but an entire city's understanding of community policing. It proved that sometimes the most powerful response to fear and prejudice isn't force or punishment, but the simple act of sharing a meal and listening to each other's stories. As the sun set over Lake Merritt, the mingled sounds of laughter, music, and conversation floated across the water, a symphony of community, a testament to the power of choosing connection over confrontation, understanding over judgment, and love over fear. And it all started because one family decided to respond to prejudice not with anger, but with an invitation to break bread together.